Psychedelic treatment is the subject of a new executive order recently signed by President Trump.
Today I'm pleased to announce historic reforms to dramatically accelerate access to new medical research and treatments based on psychedelic drugs.
Podcaster Joe Rogan was present for the signing. Rogan had previously sent a message to the president encouraging him to look into research on the psychedelic ibogaine. So what does and doesn't this executive order do? What does the research into psychedelic drugs say about their potential to treat mental health conditions like addiction and PTSD? And what is ibogaine, the psychedelic Joe Rogan texted Trump about? All that and more on this week's Status Report. To learn more about the recent executive order, I spoke with my colleague and Washington correspondent, Daniel Payne, who wrote about the signing for Stat. Hey, Daniel, thanks so much.
Hey, Alex, thanks for having me.
So what does this executive order do? What does it not do?
The big thing it does is it signals that this administration is open to trying to accelerate the adoption and the research of psychedelic drugs in clinical contexts for mental health disorders, addiction disorders, and the like. So it calls on the FDA to try to speed the approval of some drugs. It opens it to new patient populations through right to try, which means that you can go outside of some of the normal regulatory pathways to offer it to patients in extreme circumstances. It calls on the DOJ and DEA to review the schedule of these drugs once they have successful phase 3 trials. So these drugs are illegal in the US federally for the most part. And this means that if they had that these successful trials, the government would ease that back more quickly, potentially. It also puts some money toward advancing research or just the use or possible use of these drugs in clinical settings, $50 million to the states out of money that was already appropriated to HHS. So it's not an immediate legalization recreationally. It's not an immediate approval for any drugs. It's not pouring in just tons of money for new research. The sort of situation a lot of these companies were already in that were developing these therapeutics, it's a positive signal for sure. And you see markets respond accordingly. A lot of these companies had a big market response on Monday. But at the same time, it's not like the gates were just completely opened overnight. It's a substantial move, CEOs of these companies told me. But there's still more work to be done. They still have to provide data to show that these drugs are useful and worthwhile and that they should be approved. And the FDA still has plenty of opportunities to say that they shouldn't be approved because the data maybe isn't strong enough. And you saw during the announcement some scientists there, including the director of the NIH, Jay Bhattacharya, saying it's really important that we get this right. It's really important that we look at the data, even as the president himself was pushing for faster approval and faster adoption because of the stories that he had heard of veterans, for instance, who had really positive responses from the drugs.
Our colleague Elaine Chen wrote a piece today about how some in the field of psychedelics are worried that this executive order could undermine the credibility of their research. Why is that?
Yeah, it's definitely concerning to them. And part of this has to do with the history of psychedelics in this country. I mean, there's this whole cultural, legal baggage that comes with this class of drugs. That means that developers have, and at times, worked really hard to prove that these can be clinical drugs, medications, just like any other medication out there. I think some of those people feel like there's maybe a higher bar and that it could be even more difficult if there is a sense that this process is any different than any other drug approval process. When you have Joe Rogan, a famous podcaster, but not a medical authority, saying that he had texted the president about this and that Trump replied quickly and said, great, let's do it. Do you want FDA approval? That's the sort of signal that could be concerning, that maybe these approvals are not going through the same process that, some other new exciting therapy might be.
Some of the substances that are already being studied as potential mental health treatments include ketamine, psilocybin, the psychoactive chemical in magic mushrooms, LSD or acid, MDMA, aka ecstasy or Molly, and ibogaine. So how could psychedelics help with conditions like PTSD, depression, or addiction? Well, more work needs to be done. Some research suggests that psychedelics can interrupt patterns of negative thinking or behavior. The neural pathways of someone with depression, for example, can get sort of rigid over time, making someone more stuck in their depressed state. But psychedelics promote new neuronal connections. This causes the effects, like trippy hallucinations, that psychedelics are famous for. But the formation of new neural pathways may also help people break harmful cycles of thoughts or behaviors. And the effects can be long-lasting, with some patients reporting long-term relief after just one psychedelic treatment. Ibogaine, which is perhaps the least well-known of these drugs, and the one Joe Rogan brought to Trump's attention, isn't as well understood as, say, ketamine or psilocybin. It's derived from a plant called Tabernathi iboga that is indigenous to Central Africa. It has been traditionally used for religious ceremonies. Ibogaine's effects on the brain are more complex than ketamine or psilocybin. It impacts several neurotransmitters simultaneously. A Stanford University study of ibogaine published in the journal Nature Medicine in 2024 found the drug was helpful for injured soldiers. 30 US Special Ops veterans who had suffered traumatic brain injuries received ibogaine treatment at a clinic in Mexico. The men in the study experienced average reductions of 88% in PTSD symptoms, 87% in depression symptoms, and 81% in anxiety symptoms relative to how they were before the ibogaine treatment. This study, however, was observational and pretty limited. 30 people is a relatively small sample size, and there was no control group, for example. But the numbers were certainly quite striking. A follow-up study in 2025 found that veterans who improved in executive function after ibogaine treatment tended to show an increase in a type of brainwave known as theta rhythms. They also found that veterans with lowered PTSD symptoms after treatment tended to show a reduction in the complexity of brain activity in the cortex. One important thing to note is that ibogaine has well-documented cardiac risks. The veterans in these studies were given magnesium with the ibogaine dose to help mitigate that risk. These cardiac risks were cited by Nora Volkov at a 2024 STAT event in New York.
What is the problem with ibogaine? It has cardiac toxicity. And the problem when you have a drug that has the potential for reducing cardiac toxicity is that the approval process by the FDA is likely never to happen.
Volkov, however, was in the Oval Office for the executive order's signing. Even experts who are proponents of psychedelic therapy caution that the treatment alone is not a silver bullet. Ross Ellenhorn and Dimitri Mugianis, two such experts, argued in a STAT First Opinion essay that psychedelics do not work well without other treatments, and that the strongest predictor of sustained recovery from addiction is social support, stable relationships that provide belonging, accountability, and emotional care, they wrote. Ellenhorn and Mugianis also point to the fact that the so-called Big Beautiful Bill will cut more than $1 trillion from federal programs that fund addiction treatment, mental health care, housing stability, and basic economic security for millions of Americans. These policies do not merely trim abstract programs. They remove the material conditions that sustain recovery from addiction and mental and physical health problems. So what's next? There's real optimism that psychedelic treatments work. The recent executive order has created considerable political tailwinds for this research, and there are perhaps shifting attitudes in the Republican Party. We will be continuing to cover psychedelic therapy here at STAT and on Status Report. So if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Status Report.